From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
As I've said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq.
If there are threats to the United States, then I, of course, would go back to the President and make a recommendation that may include the use of U.S. military ground forces.
Less than a week after President Obama vowed not to send ground troops to Iraq, General Martin Dempsey, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, admits they may be needed. As the House votes on whether to arm rebels in Syria today, we'll speak with Congressmember Jim McDermott of Washington. Then to the Scottish vote for independence.
Take down the Union Jack. It clashes with the sunset. And ask our Scottish neighbours if independence looks any good.
That's legendary British musician Billy Bragg singing about Scottish independence in his song Take Down the Union Jack. Today, he joins us in our studio for a debate against historian Sam Wetherell on Thursday's Scottish independence vote. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The most senior U.S. military officer has said U.S. ground troops may be needed in Iraq as part of the Obama administration's offensive against the Islamic State. General Martin Dempsey, chair of the U.S. military's Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday.
As I said in my statement, however, my view at this point is that this coalition is the appropriate way forward. I believe that will prove true. But if it fails to be true, and if there are threats to the United States, then I, of course, would go back to the President and make a recommendation that may include the use of U.S. military ground forces.
General Dempsey's remarks came less than a week after President Obama told the nation, quote, "We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq." Obama's expected to visit U.S. Central Command headquarters today to discuss strategy in Iraq and Syria. The House, meanwhile, is expected to vote today on a request from Obama for authorization to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels. We'll speak with Congressmember McDermott later in the broadcast. Tuesday's Senate hearing was repeatedly interrupted by peace activists from Code Pink, who rose to protest U.S. intervention in Iraq and Syria at least 4 times in the first hour. This is Code Pink co-founder Medea Benjamin addressing Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel.
Secretary Hagel, U.S. intervention will only make matters worse.
Thank you. Would you please leave the room now? We're asking you nicely. We're asking you nicely to please leave the room.
Look at the last
We're asking you nicely to please leave the room. Thank you.
The U.S. invasion is actually opened the way for ISIL. It's the U.S. intervention that opened the way for ISIL. U.S. military will not be a solution. It is counterproductive. Don't drag us into another war. We've had 13 years of war already.
The conflict among factions in Syria has been intensifying ahead of possible U.S. strikes against Islamic State fighters there. 2 days of Syrian government airstrikes have killed at least 48 people in Homs province. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says at least 6 children are among the dead. Islamic State fighters, meanwhile, announced they'd shot down a Syrian military aircraft in the northern city of Raqqa. In the Syrian province of Idlib, at least 34 children are said to have died after receiving tainted doses of the measles vaccine. The Syrian rebel coalition, which was running the program, said supporters of the Bashar al-Assad regime may have tampered with the vaccines. They said the doses were supplied by UNICEF and the World Health Organization by way of the Turkish government. The death toll is expected to rise as many children are seriously ill. U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning has weighed in on the debate over ISIS. Manning, who served as an analyst in Iraq, wrote in an op-ed for The Guardian, quote, "ISIS cannot be defeated by bombs and bullets." She suggested a strategy of containing ISIS and allowing them to lose power and popularity over time. Chelsea Manning, previously known as Bradley, is currently serving a 35-year sentence for leaking classified information to WikiLeaks. A year ago, Manning announced she identified as a woman and planned to seek hormone therapy. Last month, the ACLU threatened to sue the Pentagon for withholding treatment for her transition, saying, quote, "It's cruel and unusual punishment to withhold from Ms. Manning the care that the military's own doctors have deemed medically necessary." President Obama's warning a record outbreak of Ebola could claim hundreds of thousands of lives. Speaking Tuesday, Obama announced the deployment of equipment and 3,000 troops to West Africa, where more than 2,500 people have died.
At the request of the Liberian government, we're going to establish a military command center in Liberia to support civilian efforts across the region, similar to our response after the Haiti earthquake. It's going to be commanded by Major General Darrell Williams, a commander of our armed Army forces in Africa. He just arrived today and is now on the ground in Liberia. And our forces are going to bring their expertise in command and control, in logistics, in engineering. And our Department of Defense is better at that. Our armed services is better at that than any organization on Earth.
A U.S. doctor who survived Ebola has criticized the lack of global response to the crisis. Dr. Kent Brantley recovered after being flown home from Liberia and receiving one of a handful of doses of an experimental drug. Speaking Tuesday, Brantley acknowledged the Ebola crisis had received relatively little coverage until he and another U.S. missionary fell ill.
This unprecedented outbreak received very little notice from the international community until those events of mid-July when Nancy Wright-Bowl and I became infected. Since that time, there has been intense media attention and increased awareness of the situation on the ground in West Africa. The response to date, however, has remained sluggish and unacceptably out of step with the scope and the size of the problem that is now before us.
According to the World Health Organization, both the total number of Ebola cases and the number of people killed have roughly doubled over the past couple weeks, with more than 5,000 total cases. The agency's announced about $1 billion will be needed to contain the crisis, which it called unparalleled in modern times. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has acknowledged the United States could improve its treatment of family members whose loved ones are held hostage by the Islamic State. His remarks come after the mother of James Foley, who was executed by ISIS, criticized the U.S. treatment of her son's case, saying officials told her she could face prosecution if she tried to raise ransom to free her son. Responding to New Hampshire Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Hagel defended the U.S. policy of not paying ransoms to terrorists, but acknowledged room for improvement in other areas.
I think we could and should maybe revisit some of these practices. Now, our national security policy directive, as you know, is very clear on ransom. That's been in place for many, many years through different administrations. I'm not suggesting we change that, by the way.
Appreciate that.
But I think maybe there are some areas that we could do a little better with, as far as in dealing with families and the human part of this.
The Obama administration's announced a delay in its most sweeping effort to date to combat climate change. The Environmental Protection Agency is extending the public comment period on a proposal to curb carbon emissions from power plants by another 45 days until December 1st, after the midterm elections. The plans face major opposition from industry lobbyists and both Republican lawmakers and their Democratic counterparts from coal-producing states. The delay comes just 1 week before delegates and protesters from around the world gather here in New York City for a UN summit and People's Climate March against global warming. Former President Bill Clinton has been caught on tape agreeing that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is, quote, not the guy to reach a long-term peace deal with the Palestinians. At a Democratic fundraiser in Iowa, C-SPAN recorded Clinton defending his own record in past negotiations as he chatted with a member of the public who criticized Netanyahu.
If we don't force him to make peace, we will not have peace.
He's talking about when he was in...
I agree with that. But in 2000, Ehud Barak, I got him to agree to something that I'm not sure I could have gotten Rabin to go to. And Rabin was murdered for giving land to the Palestinians. So, but Netanyahu is not the guy. So they got... I agree with that.
Bill Clinton's comments differ sharply from the public stances of his wife, potential Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, who's defended Netanyahu, including over this summer's Israeli assault on Gaza. Police in Utah are facing questions over the fatal shooting of a 22-year-old African-American man. Darian Hunt was shot dead outside a restaurant in Saratoga Springs last Wednesday. Utah County authorities said he was shot after lunging at officers with a samurai-style sword. But Randall Edwards, an attorney for Hunt's family, told HuffPost Live that autopsy results contradict that claim.
The family has had an independent autopsy done in which it indicates that he was shot 6 times. None of those shots entered from the front, and the one that killed him hit him right in the middle of the back. The others were in his shoulder. There were 2 in his leg. There was 1 in his elbow and 1 in his hand. So it begs the question, of course, how is it that someone ends up shot in the back if he is shot while he's lunging toward the officers?
On Monday, authorities changed their account, telling The Guardian Hunt allegedly lunged at officers outside a bank that was actually several dozen yards from where he ultimately died. Authorities also said the 2 police officers involved had not been interviewed yet, a delay which the family's attorney called almost incomprehensible. One of the officers was scheduled to be interviewed yesterday, the second tomorrow, more than a week after the shooting. Hunt's mother, Susan, told reporters she believes her son was racially profiled. Quote, "They killed my son because he's black. No white boy with a little sword would they shoot while he's running away," she said. Surveillance footage from the scene has been obtained by authorities. The National Football League's Minnesota Vikings have reversed course and barred star running back Adrian Peterson from all team activities following an outcry over his indictment for child abuse. The Vikings previously reinstated Peterson after benching him for a game. He's accused of beating his 4-year-old son with a tree branch. The controversy prompted the Radisson hotel chain to suspend its sponsorship of the team Monday. The Vikings team now says it has placed Peterson on the exempt commissioner's permission list, which prevents him from participating in team activities. President Obama's nominee to lead the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division has formally withdrawn following opposition over his ties to the legal defense of imprisoned journalist and former Black Panther Mumia Abu-Jamal. The Senate rejected the nomination of Debo Adegbile in March following a fight that focused almost solely on his role as part of an NAACP Legal Defense Fund team that successfully argued the trial judge's jury instructions violated Abu-Jamal's rights in his conviction for killing a Philadelphia police officer. In an interview with the Huffington Post, Adegbile said the Obama administration did not expect such scrutiny over that case. Quote, "I think if you look into it, it would be a rare situation in which somebody was blocked from public service for having successfully vindicated the Constitution of the United States," he said. And the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation has announced its list of 21 Genius Grant winners for 2014. Among the grantees are filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer, who made the Oscar-nominated documentary The Act of Killing about U.S.-backed death squad leaders in Indonesia, and Ai-jen Poo, director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Other winners include cartoonist Alison Bechdel, Jonathan Rapping, founder of a program to train public defenders in the South, and Sarah Deer, a professor and advocate for Native American women facing domestic violence and sexual abuse. The winners will receive $625,000 to spend however they choose. To see our past interviews with Ai-jen Poo and Joshua Oppenheimer, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to the latest on U.S. plans to expand its attack on militants from the self-described Islamic State.
Said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq.
President Obama speaking a week ago, vowing not to send ground troops into Iraq to fight the Islamic State. On Tuesday, the most senior U.S. military officer revealed ground troops may be needed. General Martin Dempsey, chair of the U.S. military's Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before the Senate.
Our military advisors will help the Iraqis conduct campaign planning, arrange for enabler and logistics support, and coordinate our coalition activities. If we reach the point where I believe our advisors should accompany Iraq troops on attacks against specific ISIL targets, I'll recommend that to the President. As I said in my statement, however, my view at this point is that this coalition is the appropriate way forward. I believe that will prove true. But if it fails to be true, and if there are threats to the United States, then I, of course, would go back to the President and make a recommendation that may include the use of U.S. military ground forces.
General Martin Dempsey, chair of the U.S. military's Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Obama is expected to visit U.S. Central Command headquarters in Florida today to discuss strategy in Iraq and Syria. Meanwhile, Congress is voting this week on a request from Obama for authorization to arm and train Syrian rebels. House expected to vote on the issue today. We go now to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Congressman Jim McDermott, Democrat from Washington State. In 1991, he voted against the Persian Gulf War. In 2002, he voted against a bill to authorize President George W. Bush to use force against Iraq. He traveled to Iraq in both 91 and 2002. Congressman McDermott, welcome back to Democracy Now! So what say you today? What are your plans? How will you vote on arming Syrian rebels?
Well, let's put this in perspective, Amy. George Bush ripped the top off Pandora's box of problems in the Middle East. And the president has been trying his best to stuff the problems back into the box and get them solved. And he has tried it in Iraq. He's tried it in Afghanistan. This situation, which has evolved from that original decision by Bush way back in 2001, is one that is very complicated. It's not black and white. It's very difficult. The president has shown what George Bush failed to show, which is remarkable reserve in how quickly he jumped to a decision. Now, what he's doing, I have serious doubts about whether there are a lot of questions you can raise about it. I don't think it's because he hasn't thought about it. I thought about all the complexities of it. And I probably will not be supportive of it because, to me, we're doing only one part. We're doing a Syria part. Let's arm a few Syrian rebels. But that doesn't say what's going to happen on the 11th of December when that expires and the Congress is back in a lame duck session and we have to face this whole issue at one bite. I think that the real problem was they're trying to rush something through here to get us out so we can run for Rome for re-election. And that's not the way to conduct public policy.
Who are these rebels that President Obama wants to arm?
Well, that's one of my questions. I think it's very difficult to tell. We've had people come over to the United States and say, I'm the Free Syrian Army, or I represent the Free Syrian Army. We saw the same sort of people coming telling us, Chalabi came over here and told us he was the Free Iraqi Army and that they were going to just take over, and if we just came and gave them a little help, well, they could throw out Saddam. So I don't know who they are, and that's going to be one of the questions is how do they vet who you hand arms to? Because we've handed arms to people in other places, and suddenly those arms are turned around and used against us. So one of my real concerns is how do you vet the people that you're going to give arms to?
Well, what kind of answers has the president given you? You are a Democrat. You're in the same party as the president. But it looks like right now what we're seeing in Congress in today's vote is there are many progressive Democrats like you who are asking President Obama some serious questions. How is the White House responding?
Well, they've tried to respond to this, but as I said, Amy, this is not black and white. It is about 90 shades of gray, and it's very hard for the president to say exactly. He says intelligence people have helped him, and they know which groups are where and so forth. I don't know if that's true or not. I have to trust his judgment that he's doing what he thinks is best for the American people. I don't have any question about whether the president is doing his absolute best at doing this. I just think it's a very, very difficult thing to do, and he's tried.
The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing Tuesday, Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire questioned General Dempsey. She expressed doubt the U.S. can defeat the Islamic State without deploying ground forces.
I'm not confident how this is going to happen without the assistance of our trained special operators on the ground here. But I appreciate that you've said that you have not ruled this out.
I have not in terms of recommendations.
Thank you. Has the president ruled it out?
Well, at this point, his stated policy is that we will not have U.S. ground forces in direct combat. So, yes.
Including operators in JTAC and embedded on the ground.
That's correct. But he has told me as well to come back to him on a case-by-case basis.
That's General Dempsey, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Congressmember McDermott, your response?
Well, there clearly is a need for some troops on the ground. One of the president's goals has been to get his allies, our allies, to come forward and commit. And one of the things that's troubling, again, is that the Turks and the Jordanians and everyone who you might think would want to put some, even the Brits are still sort of sitting back on their hands. And so it is hard to know where these folks are going to come from. Now, you can do a lot from 30,000 feet, but you ultimately have to have people on the ground. We found that out in Iraq. Rumsfeld said we could get it done with 95,000 people, and we couldn't. Shinseki was right. It would have taken 300,000 Americans on the ground to control the situation in Iraq. So if you make a misjudgment on this, you're going to wind up with some really bad situations. And I think General Dempsey is being very honest again. He's a military man, and if you say, is it possible, he has to say, yes, it is possible. But the president's position at this point is there will be no troops on the ground. Now, if the president wants to come back to the American people and say, yeah, I believe that our national interests are at stake here, and we should put troops on the ground, that is something that clearly he could do at some point. But at this point, his position is we can do it without that. And I think you have to at least respect the fact that he's trying his best to keep us out of a third war. I mean, we've had Afghanistan, we've had Iraq, and now we're sort of back into Iraq, and now Syria's opening up. And you have to ask yourself, at what point do the Americans admit that there's some things we cannot solve by military power? That's the real issue here.
Which goes to a question about Saudi Arabia. I mean, if it's not solved militarily, if that wasn't the option of first recourse, what could be done? And what about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia and its role in arming groups like the Islamic State?
Well, one of the things you have to ask yourself as you look at this situation is, how's it being funded? Now, one of the places there appears to be a source of money for ISIS is the oil fields of northern Syria, where their ISI is selling their oil, or they're smuggling oil into Turkey, and Turkey is paying them for that. That's one source of money. There's also some questions about whether money is coming from the Saudis or the Kuwaitis or the Emirates or whatever. So there's the real